So thank you, Merle, for being here and welcome. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's sunny here now, so the weather forecast is good this week. So we're happy when the sun shines.
Perfect. I want to start off right. What I want to start right off with a question that I was asking myself, and then we can talk about the weather and everything we want. But let's start right in the subject.
Okay.
Um, what does it take to be a CEO, to become a CEO, and to be a CEO? I'm interested in that. I want to know more about that.
I think firstly, ambition. You have to really want it. I don't think people become CEOs by accident. I think maybe they do, but I think probably in startups, if that is the case, then fairly quickly they bring somebody else in who wants to do the role maybe more than they do. Um, I think determination, tenacity, you have to be strong, but that doesn't necessarily mean, um, strong as in flexing muscles. There are many different kinds of strength, I think, and often the softer strength, the more internal strength is important in that role. I think, and you also have to be prepared to play bad cop as well as good cop, because I think you need to always ensure that you have the focus on what is the right thing for the business,
Hmm.
which is not always the same thing as what is the right thing for you or what is the right thing for the people in the business. So it's a balance, and sometimes it means you have to make difficult decisions as well as more enjoyable ones. So I think because it's a hard role, certainly harder than I first envisaged. And consequently, I think you have to really want it and be ambitious and determined to succeed in that role.
And how did you end up in this situation, being a CEO?
That's a good question. I think it was quite a long journey. I think that's something else that you have to recognize. It's definitely a marathon rather than a sprint. Certainly to run a business of a sizable business. Um, it was again, I think it was the determination and the ambition, and I always had it in my head that I would have my own business. I would start my own business. In my head, when I was younger, I imagined that I would do that by the age of 30, and that did not happen. So I think it is also, there's a good lesson there that trajectories of careers do not go like this; they go like this. It's
Yeah.
up and down all the time. So I think that's where the determination and the tenacity comes in, because I think when you have had a setback, you have to pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and keep going, which is sometimes a hard thing to do. So I joined this business, KD. I did not found this business, Kinneir Dufort. It's 43 years old. And I joined the business about 10 years ago. And then around 5 years ago now, I led a management buyout of the business, which was backed by private equity. So essentially, what that means is that four of the five directors who were the owners of the business were planning to leave the business and retire. So I then had to go to private equity firms who are essentially private bankers and pitch for the money to buy the business, to give them a minority stake in the business moving forward. And then the broader management team here at KD, the majority stake in the business. So we did that, and that was completed in 2016. And we have been working in partnership with them now for the last 4 years. So that was an interesting journey as well, because a very, very different world, the world of banking and finance, to what we do, which is innovation and product development. So very, very different. Again, sort of having to learn new language, new skills, new ways of working to work alongside them. But it has been productive.
And a lot of elements to juggle with, I guess. Do you sometimes get overwhelmed because I guess there's so much you have to pay attention to, and teams and task and skills, and there's so much to do, right?
Always. I read the other day that we only have a certain number of decisions that we can make in one day.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes at the end of the day, where the decision is, what will I have for my dinner? I've just got to, I'm done. I'm just anything. I don't care because I can't actually make any more decisions.
That's dangerous though, because that's the time when we eat the wrong stuff. We rarely go for the decision of a healthy vegetable, right?
Exactly. Not
and,
after a
and
difficult day.
and how did you work on that skill to be able to juggle, to take decisions, to how did you improve about that?
Well, I think personally, we talk a lot about superpowers, in fact, but we were talking about the other day, Jim
Yes,
Collins,
yes.
Good to Great. So he talks about something called the hedgehog concept, which is three intersections of circles. So we have what drives your commercial engine. This is around driving success in a business or individually. What drives your commercial engine? What are you best in the world at, and what is your passion? And I think I have always said personally that what I am best in the world at, I guess what my superpower is compartmentalization. So I find this very, very easy to be able to switch off and imagine, my life at home or my life at work, or, put my attention to a specific scenario or situation. I'm able to do that. And I think that's incredibly useful, because you find yourself having to move around so quickly and study different subjects in depth very, very quickly. So compartmentalization really helps.
So I was wondering, can you just say one sentence about what your company actually does? Of course, people can see online if they want to know more, but just in a
Yeah.
sentence.
So Kinneir Dufort, or KD as we call it, is a innovation and product development consultancy. So that means that we bring together three elements in terms of how we think about developing products and services. So we talk around the technical innovation that's needed to create new experiences or products or ecosystems. We combine that with the creative sort of aesthetic of that. And the third element is the user experience. So creating something that is intuitive and easy to use and a compelling experience. So we bring those three factors together, and we work across mainly consumer healthcare and some FMCG products. So everything from physical, digital, through to service and experiences for predominantly large blue chip organizations, and we work with some interesting startups as well.
And before that, what were you doing? What is
So
in a nutshell how did you end up here?
I've always worked in design consultancy.
Okay.
So for over 20 years. So from when I graduated, that was the path that I took. I love creativity. I can't actually design or draw myself, so I had to do it vicariously through strategy and innovation.
Great. And one question I wanted to ask you as well is, as a woman, do you think it was harder for you to arrive at this position? I guess yes, but I want to hear it from you, and how. What kind of obstacles did you encounter?
In this industry that is more focused around product development and engineering as well as creative design, in consultancy in the UK, it is 5% women, 95% men. It's worse than architecture or software development. It's very difficult for women to break into. I don't think I realised that when I first started working in this field, but it became very obvious because there were not many women around in the business or in other businesses that I came across. So it's harder, but I actually think in a way you can use your skills as in terms of, as well as being strong and sort of good at what you do. That's fundamentally the basis. You have to be great at what you do, and you have to be focused and determined in terms of how you can drive forward scenarios to enable opportunities to come from those. And I think probably you have to be a bit thick-skinned and potentially not really care as much about what some people might say or think, because I think, as in every field, there are old-fashioned attitudes sometimes about what women should and shouldn't do. But it's important to be able to set examples for our kids now, and women that are starting out on these career paths, to demonstrate to them that they can achieve whatever they want. It might not be to be a CEO, it might be to be something entirely different, but whatever their motivation, the opportunities are there.
And do you think that women, if it's kind of a generality, but again, I want to hear it from you and your point of view as a woman, but do you think men are more thick-skinned than women in general in business, or is it just an idea that...
I think it's difficult to generalize, because obviously everybody is different, but we can see statistically that there is more confidence in terms of their own abilities often in men. And that's not just my view, that's actually quantitative data that's proven that. So for example, if a man has 2 or 3 of the 10 skills required, statistically he is more likely to apply for that role. Whereas if a woman is applying for the same role and has 8 of those 10 things, statistically she is less willing to apply. She is less likely to negotiate on her package and her salary. She is less likely to ask for, for additional benefits, etc. So there's been a lot of studies that have gone on in terms of behaviours. So I think, obviously as well, if you don't necessarily fit in, if you don't look like everybody else around you, and whether that's because you're a woman or any factor at all, that makes it harder, because you see less similarities, and you just generally fit less, because you are not the same as the other people around you. So I think that does make it harder. But ultimately, hence the point about saying you have to almost stop caring about some of that and drive through that.
So that's a great advice for them, I guess. And what kind of tips would you give to any woman who wants to climb the ladder, whatever the industry is, and be like you and great at what you do? And so one of the advice is that stop caring and be more thick-skinned, maybe, a woman or men, by the way. But what are the other advices would you give, especially to women?
Yeah, I think it's stop caring so much. I think caring is great, and being empathetic and demonstrate, but potentially stop caring so much about what other people think about you. I think that can hold people back, because it can impact on confidence. I think there's a saying that I use, which is, behind every great woman there is many, many more women. So I think that's important in terms of finding your network, finding your support, and finding that in an environment that you're comfortable in, which is harder for women, because I think it's important that you have sponsors, you have mentors, you have people who can give you advice and perhaps are potentially a little bit removed from the situation. So we have set up mentoring schemes, and the work that we do for an organisation called Kerning the Gap around women in leadership. There is another quote that I like using, which was Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State in the US a few years back, and she said that there is a special place in hell for women who do not support other women, because I think some women choose not to, but ultimately it's a responsibility, if you climb the ladder, to send the ladder back down, and to make sure that people are that you're helping people potentially how you were helped in your career. I think it's a mistake to think that if you've made it yourself, that other people should do the same. I think we have a responsibility to help people progress and grow and learn.
Yeah, that's a great point. And last time I was having my podcast with Sonia Choquette, who is a coach, an American coach in intuition, and she was saying for herself that when she arrived in Paris, it was just at the time that she wanted to improve in her career and in another phase in her life. She was having this attitude as a woman of she's a victim. And I was wondering what you thought of that. That she was, she was kind of what she was saying. It was American versus French, which is debatable. But she was basically saying that she wanted to get out of this mindset. I'm a woman. I have to be taken care of, and to take her destiny, kind of, if we can say in those terms, take her destiny. I don't know if did you feel the same thing or.
I don't think I've ever felt like that personally. And I think some people, absolutely, I understand some people do. And I think there's probably societal influences around that as well.
Yeah.
And, those are often ingrained in us from when we are young. But I think, my mother always worked through her career, when I was small, and as did obviously my father. And I always remember how hard they worked when I was young. They were always working. So I think, they instilled that ethos of hard work, but also that ethos of you can be whoever you want to be.
Yeah.
You don't have to necessarily conform to societal norms. But I do think, and I've seen that throughout my career and even at university, that often, there is that preconception that women can't do something because maybe it's too hard or too challenging or, it's not befitting. And I think, all of those factors do then often, create this place where women feel there's a natural space for them to inhabit. But ultimately, and for some people, that might be what they want out of life, and that might be their motivation. And if so, that's fine. But I think there's an important lesson there that they need to know that if they want more, then that's possible too.
Yeah. I think the last sentence was unclear because it cut. Can you repeat what you said? Just the last words.
Yeah, so I was just saying, as well as understanding that, that might be what some people want in terms of their motivation, they also need to understand that if they want more, then that's possible too.
Yeah. It's great that you said that you saw your parents, because also a big one of my favorite theme to talk about is education. And we always say that parents, they I don't know in English, lead by example. That's what I would say, or teach by example. And that's what they did with you, basically. They didn't ask you need to work hard, or tell you that necessarily you. I mean, maybe they did say you can become whoever you want to become, but ultimately they show it. So this is also very important for parents.
Yeah, and that was the norm. And I think also, building on your point, Bootsy, they placed an incredible amount of importance on education. They saw education as the key to the opportunities in life, and I think actually, I think maybe, I'm not sure I necessarily agree 100% with that in terms of further education. I think, we've seen many examples of people who never went to university or never sat, left school at 16, who have come on to be incredible successes in their lives.
Yeah.
But I think they understood the confidence that education can give you, and how important that is.
Yeah, and they educated themselves in different way as well. It's not necessarily that they went to college. It's just they learned by themselves, and they reinvented themselves. And there's something, as a CEO, how do you, something I was wondering myself, how do you do to gather people around a mission, around a purpose that might not be theirs, because you are a CEO, you're a partner in this company, you have this sense of ownership naturally. How do you give this sense of ownership, and that people really want to do it, not just because if they don't, they're fired, basically?
I think what's absolutely key to that is the values in the company, and how you drive those values through the business in terms of consistency around those, because many companies have values that are written on the wall somewhere in the building, but ultimately, if they're not lived, then they're not true. So we have 5 values in the business, and they are smart. And I'm not just talking in terms of how intelligent somebody is, but smart in terms of
Sure.
how you work, in terms of flexible working, in terms of the processes, the systems, the way we interact with our projects, our clients, everything. We talk about openness, and this is the transparency in which we work. So everything from financial data across the business through to how decisions are made and rationales created. We share all of that with all of the team. And I think that's really important in terms of bringing people on board and how we engage with them regarding strategy and direction. We talk about pioneering, because I think a lot of the work that we do is cutting edge, but also in terms of how we work and how we drive forward. And I think that fits into our fourth, which is curiosity. Because I think if you have a natural curiosity, and if you look to bring people into the team that also share that natural curiosity, then you deliver better work, because people are always asking. It was like your example that we spoke of previously around what if,
Yeah.
unless. So all that time building on that natural curiosity. And the fifth one, which is the most important, 100%, is respect. And that does not matter if it's respect in terms of, if it's the CEO or the housekeeper who is putting, the bins out. It does not make any difference. There has to be complete respect and openness. So we do things in our business like we have an open board. So when we have our board meetings once a month, we encourage anyone from the business to come into that and to ask any question they want at the board table. So there's complete openness, and we do not know what people are going to ask, and they can ask anything they want. So we do not have I hot desk, so I do not have an office. So I move around constantly throughout the building, and it means that I'm always there, which might be annoying for some of the team, but it also makes me quite accessible. So it's really about how those values are then lived through the business. And actually with coronavirus, that made that hugely easier, because when we were making decisions about how we would close the office or work remotely or how we would move forward in these difficult times, because we'd always had such openness across the business, we were able to share all of our thinking. And consequently, all of our team were on board and understood why. And some of them turn around and say, actually, I don't need to know that, because that's your job to figure that out. It's my job to do this engineering task. And that's fine too, because fundamentally they trust us to make the right decision. They trust me to make the right decision for them, which is a huge responsibility, but also very gratifying to know. So I think it's really how you live your values and really drive those through, and then the team are all on board and clear. There's clarity.
How does that translate concretely? I guess you have this sign behind you, which is obviously about curiosity, and which is more of a direct, a concrete tip. Ask more questions, which is cool. It gives a cool atmosphere, and it brings them back to the values of the company. For other values, let's say smart. I love this value, but it seems to me that it would be hard to bring people on this thing. How do you make sure that what they do is smart, or do you say what you do isn't smart? I don't see how concretely you have them care about the values.
So with smart, so for example, we introduce systems and processes which are smart. So that could be smart in terms of the technology used, but also in terms of how intuitive they are. Going back to those three circles we talked around technical, creative, and the user experience. So we make things as intuitive and as straightforward as possible in terms of how we work. So I think we are constantly in this cycle of feedback and building and changing and iterating, and actually asking for opinions to share. So they feel stakeholders in this process, because often it's their idea which has made this way of working better or improved. So it's around how we kind of open that up. And I think another part of asking people to work smartly, particularly in terms of how people are working now with so many more people working remotely, it's around trust. There's an element of trust associated with that, because we have always had flexible working, or for some time, because we have. My view has always been, if you don't trust somebody to work smartly, then why are you giving them a job in the first place? Because if you can't trust somebody, and I think that's really been tested, because we were able now in this time to say to our team, you work smart, however that is for you. So that might mean you work from 8 p.m. until midnight because you have children at home who are not at school. It might mean that you work less hours per day and 7 days a week. However you want to do that, you do what works for you. Because again, being smart in terms of how we work is around that balance between our lives and our work lives, and our lives outside the office or outside the studio, because never has that been tested as much as it has been recently. And then I hear of examples of friends of mine who work at companies where they have to be logged on their computer at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they are their bosses are checking to see if they're there. And you think, how is that smart? Because all they want to do now is, as soon as this is over, look for a new job, because they feel completely undermined and untrusted. Whereas if we can change that and give people autonomy, and consequently they understand that actually it's about balancing what's best for the company with what is best for them. So I think smart is everything, really, in terms of how we want to live as a business, and whatever way that looks moving forward. So, for example, we just actually next week we will have the results of when coronavirus started in March. We launched a steering group around ways of working, around how we could be smarter post COVID, and what would change as a result of that. And that group has no management in it at all. It is the team who have volunteers who wanted to be involved in that. So they will come back and present their findings from that later this week.
Yeah.
Does that bring it to life a bit?
Good. Sorry?
Does that bring it to life a bit?
Yeah. And I think this issue of trust is very present in a lot of companies, because they fear, it's kind of fear. They fear that the person at home is not going to work. So do you think it's because you trust your employee that they actually are honest and do the work they have to do, or does it has also something to do with the kind of people you hire?
Yeah, it's both. Absolutely, it's both. And again, Jim Collins, he talks around in his book Good to Great, getting the right people on the bus. And I think this is absolutely crucial. You have to have the right people in the business. And I think, those 5 values that we talked about earlier, it's almost like a checklist in an interview. Is this person, smart? Are they curious? Are they demonstrating respect in the way that they're behaving? Are they pioneering in terms of the work that they have done? So it's absolutely about getting the right people on the bus. I think that's so important, because then you can trust. But ultimately, if you can't, if they're not the right people, I think that's often quite obvious. And I think many people will compromise because they can't find those people, because they're often very difficult to find, and so you might be tempted to compromise. But I think, as hard as that can be in a short time, I think you will always regret it if you compromise in terms of the quality of the people that you bring on board, because particularly in what we do, because we don't have a product that falls off the end of a manufacturing line. We are the sum of our parts, the people in the business. So we are as good as or as good as bad as the strongest or weakest link in the business.
Yeah, that's so true. And at the same time, it's so hard to do. That comes with experience as a CEO, I guess, hiring the right people. When you say it's obvious, I guess it's obvious maybe for you and not for all the people, or you think for some people it's obvious and they compromise. That's what you said, right? You think for them it's obvious, but they say, yeah, but we don't have time, or why would they compromise? Actually, I don't think I understand that.
It's really hard though, and I do get it wrong. I get it wrong all the time. I think one of the other traps that's very easy to fall into is to recruit people, and it goes back to the point we were making about being different to everyone around you. It's much easier to recruit somebody that you can relate to. So to recruit in your shadow, somebody who who may be from a similar background or have similar experience or similar qualifications, or know people on your friendship network, and that can be really tempting because you can understand those people's motivations easier often. But actually, I think as well that can be a real mistake, because you can be projecting your own experiences or understanding on those individuals, and it might be it's completely different. So I think that's quite an easy trap to fall into as well when recruiting, to sort of draw comfort from people who you understand, or people that you think will kind of share your values. But often it's somebody who's very different to you who is actually what you need for the business.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. So what to end up on this chapter around that, what other advice can you give any leader or someone who's building a team, other than what you all said about gathering people around a purpose and around values? And do you have a few tips about that?
Yeah, I think follow your instinct, follow your gut. Because people talk a lot about head and the heart, but I think our instinct is often very important too. So, and it goes back to that compromise. If you have that instinct that you there's something just not sitting quite right with you, and you think they feel like they've got all the qualifications we need, but there's something saying, I'm not sure. So my instinct is telling me I'm not sure. Then I think you should always listen to your instinct. But I would also be really open to hiring people who take you out of your comfort zone, because I think for example, we were talking around product development and how few women there are involved in this industry. And actually that presents problems of its own, because and we hear of this in new technology and AI and all these areas as well, where in those instances, the software, the programming is being done by, one group of people. There is no diversity. In the same way, if you're designing products, often there is little diversity in the product development team. There's one example I read recently of it's a really interesting startup business that is making breast pumps for new mums who are breastfeeding. And all of the individuals who were talking about it in the product development team were all men. And you think, there is no first-hand experience of what it is like to you. Well, maybe they have used a breast pump, but I don't
we don't want to know. We don't want to know.
Right? Yeah, that's just evenings and weekends. But it's whatever the scenario is, having that diversity in your team to be able to demonstrate empathy and relatability to individuals or scenarios or opportunities is really important.
And obviously from different cultures, and today we're talking a lot about that with what recently happened, but also to link it back to men and women. I think too many women or too many men can be bad in one way or the other. The guys are, if there's a team of guys that tend to be too, your example is great, of course, because it's obviously the product that is unrelated to the experience, but yeah, the personality of the group can shift if there are too many of them. So yeah.
And actually character types as well as whether it's male or female. So I think it's important to think about that when building a team, particularly if it's a team that are working very closely together. It's about what kind of profile are they as well, and understanding how all of that fits together is hugely important, because otherwise you can have sizable issues in teams.
And how would you hire someone that is already creative and you feel the person is creative, or can you also help the person develop his or her creativity? And how would you do that if the person is in your team?
So we talk about when we hire, and I think this is actually any level, but particularly probably maybe the first 10 years of somebody's career. We talk about 25% experience, 25% qualifications, and 50% attitude. Because I think for people to have the right attitude, an attitude towards learning and developing, and that natural curiosity, then people are like sponges. They can learn and develop and grow, and I think that's hugely important. So absolutely, it's got to be around people's attitudes and how open they are really to developing and learning. I think if somebody came in to the room for an interview and came with the attitude that they already had learned and understood all that they could, then I think that would be a no from me.
Yeah, definitely. And last time we were talking about innovation in companies, even more than creativity and disruptive innovation. And what's your take on that? Do you think innovation, some kind of disruptive innovation, can come from employees? And how would you manage the fact that they will have to have some more time to work on an innovation, or on a specific method, on a specific way to approach something? What's your take on that?
So I think we have downtime lists. So people, if they're not busy on projects, and there's opportunities for them to kind of work on other things, proactive projects. We also have internal projects that have been proposed by members of the team, and then we pull together other resources from different areas, because we have such a multidisciplinary team. So we have innovation experts, industrial designers, digital team, mechanical engineers, electronics and software. So they can pull resources onto projects. So we try and encourage that internally. And I think in terms of sort of what I see in corporate world, it really varies from each organization. I think it has to come from the top. There has to be this respect and this need for innovation and creativity. Some businesses have that now. I think others are still quite behind the curve as to what that looks like. And in some fields that can be influenced by regulatory, such as healthcare, etc. Then there's very tight regulations. But I think it also can be. It's interesting, if you think about what's happened over the last few months. So we were involved in a project, for example, to create a ventilator to get 10,000 into hospitals, and that was done in 85 days. Normally, that process would take about 5 years to go through, and that went through regulatory process. So I think often that demonstrates, when there really is a need and a pressure, as we've seen over the last few months, then how quickly things can happen and how seriously innovation can materialize and develop. I think it's interesting, this spectrum from incremental innovation through to genuine transformative innovation. I think that is very hard for large corporates to do, and they often sort of outsource that. So that could take the form of an acquisition. It could take the form of a small sort of spin out working independently of the main organization. I think that creates challenges as well in terms of how they then bring that back into the organization. I've seen so many different ways of people trying to do it.
Each one has its own challenge, right?
Yeah,
so you have to pick your battle. You have to say, I want this type of challenge.
Yeah, so many challenges. And I think there is this, when people try and innovate outside of the parameters of the organization, of sort of the operational system as it has been set, it more often fails than succeeds, because it's just how they bring that back into the business. So, I mean, huge amounts of challenges, I think, but I think often we do a lot of work in that space, so that can work quite well because we can challenge in a way that you can as an external partner rather than internally within the business. But and I think that's often how we deliver value. But it's I think incremental innovation is often done very, very well inside large businesses. But it's that metaphor of a supertanker. In trying to turn that around, and the length of time that takes weeks to turn that around. Many of these organizations, as agile as they try and become, are still supertankers, and they cannot get that agility and that speed that they need to succeed at this. So I think that's often the opportunity for entrepreneurs and how they can drive opportunity. But I think, again, that's been a challenge for lots of small businesses through coronavirus and the impact of that, because they're often managing very tight cash flows and reliant on funding, which may dry up at these times or get more difficult to secure.
Yeah. And what is the place of design thinking in your innovation process?
Yeah, so I think design thinking, it's been talked about a lot. Essentially, design thinking is really around putting the user at the heart of what you're doing. And I think most businesses now...
Design thinking is really what?
Is really, essentially, it's about putting the user and their experience in the heart of the process and what you're doing. So we've always worked in that way because with so much of our work being around healthcare and consumer healthcare, it's what the usability of for example, if you take a medical device, you legally have to go through formative and summative testing, as it's known, before you can launch a product, essentially to make sure it's safe, that this product's not going to kill anybody or harm anybody. So that is a legal requirement of launching a program, that you have done usability testing on it, as it should be. However, every other product in the world, well, nearly every other product in the world, apart from a few sectors such as healthcare, there is no legal requirement to test a product and understand how the user will use this. So that's become much, much more central to how people work. But we will always test and use those insights from our users to develop the product, and then to test that, and then to iterate that, to change that, or to build on that, and then go through that cycle again, which is essentially design thinking as we now use it. So that process that has been around for some time is being used across a much broader remit now, and we will always try and promote this. There are still some clients that will not and do not engage with their users, and ultimately the products are not as good or not as compelling because they will miss insights that are user driven. So in that regard, I think healthcare is ahead of the curve.
Ahead of what?
Ahead of the curve. So it's ahead of many other companies.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting now how many businesses are starting to pay more attention to them. And again, there is data around which shows that companies that engage with design thinking processes are more profitable.
No, totally. And a lot of startups have also used this approach because they know they can iterate very fast. They can test it and do the whole process faster than big companies. So I think it's a good way to approach a new company, is to gather data as quick as you can, develop a product as good as you can, as fast as you can. I mean, and just test it and redo it again and again.
Yeah, and then we get into the territory of MVPs, minimum viable products. So actually, it doesn't have to be beautifully finished and created for someone to actually understand how they're going to use it, how they're going to interact with it. So again, from a startup perspective, the investment doesn't have to be huge. I think the one thing I would always encourage people to do when they're starting a new product is not just speak to their friends and their families about their product, because when we get approached by entrepreneurs, they will often come with an idea and they will say, I've spoken to all my friends and family and they think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, of course they do, because they love you. Your people who will be buying your products do not love you. So,
but there is this book, The Mom Test. Have you read this book?
No, I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
You've heard of it?
Yeah, but not read it.
It's exactly what you said, basically. I mean, the title says most of it, and it's they even say that when you talk to people, even though they're not from your family and they're not your friends, don't tell them what it's about, because if they know, you have to test them in some clever ways. Otherwise, they would always say, "Oh, that's what you do." Well, then it's great.
Yeah.
Of course, they will say it's great. They don't want to offend you. No, it's totally true. It's totally true. We for our company, I read the Mom Test, and he was saying that he lost so much time in just interviewing people and asking the wrong questions. So I tried what he said, and I just called parents, and I was super vague. I was just saying, what are the challenges you have in today's education with your kids? I didn't say I had a company. I didn't say I want to. It's just just curious. Just tell me. And so many things came out of this. And then as at the end, I was saying, oh, I have this company, and then this idea of a company, and then the whole thing switched. It changed, right? The whole everything they were saying. So yeah, sure. Oh, you can do that. Oh, if you do this, yeah, then it's cool. But it had nothing to do with the challenges that we're facing. So no, I totally agree. But I think also talking about education, there is so much to teach about creativity and curiosity and how to innovate even in your life. Just this and all the values you described, openness and respect. I mean, respect has been, there's a lot, especially also at school, but definitely not about curiosity and creativity. I think is a shame. I don't know what's your experience with that in school, and you're a mom, right?
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
two kids. I have a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I think it was something you were saying the other day. It made me think about it, because I think we have forgotten how to play, and I think this is something I think that is really important when it comes to creativity. I think all children have creativity instilled in them, and at some point that's lost. And I think there isn't that value associated with creativity in the economy, in the community, which is a real shame. It feels like it's a missed opportunity, because it's so important, and it doesn't matter what role you're doing in terms of how you're thinking and how you're problem solving. Creativity is key, and I know this is something that you focus on, and it feels like it's not, or historically hasn't been valued. We have a lot of organisations, and we work with some of them around how we can increase STEM education, and around science and technology, which is important as well, and how we can get greater diversity in that, because there is an issue at schools around girls studying STEM subjects. But I think equally, it feels like we need to instill the value of creativity back into our education system. And it's not just something that I think if most parents, the majority of parents, if their child came to them and said, I want to study law at university, they would be quite happy. If they came and said, I want to study art, maybe some parents would be less happy, because they would not think that it was such a good investment in terms of a return on investment, getting your money back. But actually, there's so much value in how we can do that. So I think it's around how we recognize that more across society as well.
Yeah, and across different topics as well. Like I totally agree with what you're saying, but also the first thing that came to mind is law versus art. And I think creativity, sometimes you can be an artist and not be creative, and sometimes you can be a lawyer and be super creative in the way you run your business, you communicate with people, you market yourself, and the scope is almost as big than when you're an artist. I mean, it depends what kind of artist you are, but That's a whole different subject. I think I've taken enough of your time already, and we've covered so many subjects. I'm super happy that you gave us all those tips for all entrepreneurs out there and people who wants to climb the ladder like you did. So yeah, no, that's great. I'm super happy. Merle, thank you so much. If there are comments in this video, you can leave a comment just below and we will answer it. And I will ask Merle, hey, look, there is this comment. Can you please answer it? In any case, thank you so much, Merle.
Thank
And
you, Vinci.
I see you soon, maybe on another
Hopefully.
event. Yes.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.